Hello Internet, I'm Spencer Wilson, and today's video will be about what Exploding Kittens taught me about tension in interactive media. I've been super interested in Exploding Kittens ever since I first saw it on the shelves of my local game store. It really hooked me with the interesting art style and with its intriguing name as it stands. And so eventually I bought it and I played it. And I played it again and again. And after a while, a few hours had passed. This game is super entertaining and maintains its entertainment value, if not increases it the longer you play it. It's quite interesting to me how such a simple game can do so without really providing much depth at all. It's pretty straightforward and not much there to learn except for a few key mechanics. So I thought I'd break it down today and see what Exploding Kittens does right. The first thing we need to do in order to break down Exploding Kittens is to see what's at its core. What is the heart of the game? What is it built around? In some games, this can be very convoluted and hard to pick out and pry out of the game's mechanics. But in this case, it's super straightforward. They claim it on their website, and they claim it on almost all of the boxes, that basically the goal of the game is to not die by not drawing an exploding kitten. So the core of the game is for a bunch of players to sit around a deck and draw cards until they get an exploding kitten and they die. It's already kind of entertaining as your odds of survival go down and down the further you get into it, and as soon as someone dies, it's a large release of tension as the odds shift dramatically and one of the players has to leave the game. So let's see how they build around this core of drawing cards until you die. So let's build around this main mechanic of tension and its releases as players die, and let's add mechanical value and let's add other things into the game that mess with these mechanics, but just barely enough to keep the core of the game the same and only amplify the fun. I feel like the first thing that was probably thought up of was Defuses. If you could have a card in hand that could stop you from blowing up just once even, that is super useful and it changes the tides of the game very quickly. But I feel like there's almost two mechanical values to the Defuses. There's the first part, which is it stops you from exploding, which is really useful and helps change the game a lot. But there's also the second part where you are allowed to put the exploding cat back in the deck wherever you want. This almost perfectly eliminates another player, especially as the game that we're building right now stands. There is no way for a player to avoid it. And so this is a huge upper hand for something that would have been a huge negative for you. So I feel like a Defuse is a great place to start in adding this mechanical value and by bringing the game to the next level. The next mechanic we'll add will be the attack and skip cards. These cards add a lot of mechanical value, but they're almost the same as they both just end your turn without drawing a card. The attack card is just slightly more powerful. Now, how these cards mess with the game is they play off the mechanic of the Diffuse card, specifically the second part of the mechanic that I had mentioned, and also the core mechanic of the game. They dramatically shift your odds on if you will draw an exploding kitten or not. So if someone has targeted you with a Diffuse, you can screw with their targeting by simply skipping your turn, and this will lay the chances of the exploding kitten onto another player. Now, it's also super useful if the deck is getting thin, that you can play the skip card and it will automatically give you an increased advantage over the other players. Now, with these cards, it's very easy to see how they can play off of those mechanics. But they also add a sub-mechanic, a kind of meta decision that needs to be made during the game. And that is, how long do you hold on to your cards? A Diffuse is pretty simple. You hold on to it until you explode, and that's when you use the Diffuse. But the skip card is way more versatile. It could be played early on when there is low risk, so there's less effect from you playing a skip card, but you're still there and you know you're still going to be there. Or you can hold on to it for a little while longer, and the longer you hold on to it, the more probable it is you draw an Exploding Kitten before you get to play your skip card. So that deciding of how long you hold on to them is something that each player will kind of play a little differently and will play according to the circumstance and will be messed with. So that's something that the skip and attack card that add great value to the game. And this kind of how long do you hold on to your things plays really well into the tension that builds with the lowering and lowering of odds of survival as the game continues. The next card we'll add will be the See the Future card. We'll add this card and it will play off of the skip and attack cards, especially the second kind of meta decision of the skip and attack cards, which is the fact that how long you wait to play them has a dramatic effect on the likelihood of them being useful. So with the See the Future card, we'll be able to make well-informed decisions on when to play those cards. We'll be able to see that if there's an Exploding Kitten immediately on the next draw, that we should play our skip cards, and it'll be a perfectly efficient use of our skip card, and will also give us one more round almost as if a Diffuse was played. So those two in combination are very powerful. Another thing is, if there are no Exploding Kittens, then we can see that we can hold our cards or hold the more powerful cards that we have until later, or until when we see Exploding Kittens later in the game. So that way we can more efficiently use the cards in our hands. That way we're not wasting them on cards that are harmless to us. This also gives other players a little sense of what's on top of the deck if you play immediately to the value that's there. And so other players will be able to see, based on your actions, if it's an Exploding Kitten or if it's pretty safe. And this allows for a lot of fun between players where they try and suss out what the other one saw and what they should do on their turn, trying to gather just a little bit of information off of the information that they just collected. It's a really unique feature, and it will add a lot to the game. So that would be my next add. The next card we'll add is one of my table's favorites. It is the Nope card. The Nope card brings a whole slew of fun with it, as it allows you to kind of stop players in their tracks from shifting their odds of drawing an Exploding Kitten onto you. You can just say no and stop them in their tracks. It's a great way to add a lot of tension to the table between members, as well as they try and compete for who gets the final say in a Nope battle. Nope battles being where Nopes get noped themselves. This also causes players to stockpile Nopes during the game to try and one-up the other Nopes that other players have, so that the actions that are most important to them can go through. Or to stockpile them to stop an action that's most important to another player from going through. This can heavily sway the odds of the game and cause a lot of fun as players see how far this Nope chain will go, or if it'll stop dead in its tracks the next time someone plays a Nope. It's very interesting as well to try and plan around how many Nope cards another player has. It makes it so that players care a lot more about what's in another player's hand. Before, this wasn't really the case when we just had the skip and the diffuse cards, as you were just trying to play your hand to the best of your ability, and you didn't really care what other players did. Not very much, at least. And in this case, you now care a lot, because you have a say on what they get to do. This adds a large element to the game, and I feel like it's a great addition and helps keep things going. Now that other players have powerful cards that you may want or need for your gameplay and for what's coming up next for you, let's add our next mechanic, stealing cards. Now, the base level of this would be the Favor card, which, when played, allows a player to ask another player to give them a card, and that player gives them a card of their choice. This is kind of the weakest version of stealing cards, and stealing cards comes in all sorts of varieties, so we'll have a lot more power to work with as we work up. But As we can see, this is the lowest cost for the lowest reward. The lowest cost being how many times you would have to draw to get the combo required to have this ability take effect. Now, the next level up would be two of a kind. If I lay down two cards of the same type, then I get to take at random a card from someone else's hand. Now, this is the next step up, and it is much more powerful as you have more control over what card you get. Instead of them just choosing whatever card they don't want you, or a card that they know you won't be able to use, you now get to pick at random and are way more likely to get those cards that you want and that they don't want you to have. Now, to increase this power level one more time, we can do three of a kind. Three of a kind is where you get to name out a card, and if they have that card, then they have to give it to you. This is super useful for if you know of a card that they have in their hand, and you can name that card off and be guaranteed to receive it. Or it's helpful if you also have a very specific card you need or want and that you're looking for, and you can ask for that, and if they have it, they'll give it to you. Now, the last power level of this, it would be 5 different cards. So if you have 5 cards that have different types on them, then you will be able to play those to look for any card in the discard pile and add it to your hand. This is super useful for after someone has played a Diffuse, and it is super powerful as you know exactly what card you're getting and what cards you're choosing from, as the discard pile is open for everyone to look at. So these different power levels of receiving cards that give you power and stuff based on card types, mostly for combinations, allows us to add something else to the game that's super necessary to keep the game longer and to have more fun with, and that would be to add a ton of filler cards. These are the cats cards from the game where you have like Taco Cat or Beard Cat. These cards are just filler cards that meet type requirements, and so you can steal cards with them, and that's about it. They're also super useful for just giving to another player, as they are not very powerful on their own. So, those cards allow the game to also last longer, because as you draw, you'll draw more of those, and the Exploding Kittens will take longer to get to. Now for the last card, and unfortunately the weakest game designed card, as it is just barely there, barely messes with other mechanics, and doesn't really have an impact on the gameplay. This card is the Shuffle card. The Shuffle card allows you to play it and shuffle the deck in any way that you choose. I've never really seen it be used very effectively, besides when people specifically target other people with Exploding Kittens, or where there are tense times where you know an Exploding Kitten is coming up. Now, those times they are useful, but most of the other times they just sit in your hand and are filler that you can hand to someone else. They are not completely useless, and I wouldn't say that they are by any means bad, but they are just the weakest link of this game, and I feel like that the most improvement could be had on that area. Now that we have all of the cards in the game, let's look back and see why Exploding Kittens has gotten the popularity that it has. And looking at it a little bit deeper, I see that the skip and the attack cards are kind of key elements, as they add this second level to the game of how long do you wait to play certain cards. They add a lot of depth to the game that isn't apparent at the first sight of the game. This is something that we can take note of as game designers, to see that this little decision has so much impact on how the game is played. It also adds so much gameplay as to whether or not you can affect other players and how that works, which is always intriguing in its own right. So it's no wonder that Exploding Kittens has faced the popularity and acclaim that it has, as it is super simple yet super well designed and super distilled down to the parts that make it what it is. And that's why I love Exploding Kittens. This is probably why it has faced so much success, such as being able to have expansions and to have a mobile app and to have other games from the company that created this, as they didn't go out and lose a lot on this initial game. They made a lot, and so they were able to continue their company and to continue making great games. So this is something that we can take into our sort of game design and development. Now, if you guys are interested in more game design and development content from me and my channel, then make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. You guys have a great day.